Hello, this is Joshua Cook from benswan.com, and I'm here with Jesse Graston, who's a state coordinator for the John Birch Society. And I wanted to bring you on, Jesse, because tomorrow is Constitution Day. And I was thinking, like, who could come on and talk about the Constitution? Who's passionately fighting to bring this country back to the founding documents, which is basically limited government and individual freedom. So, Jesse, thanks so much for coming out.
Sure, thanks for having me on with the program here. And I'm privileged enough to represent a society that's been around since the 50s and has truly been what I would consider the Jedi Force in protecting the Constitution and exposing the enemies of it.
Yeah, and we did a lot of activism. We're still doing a lot of activism pertaining to nullification. I went with my son to a local museum, and it talked about the history of South Carolina. But one of the sections was about, it was a little question, and I'm going to put it on the video, was who were the nullifiers? And then it had a picture of John C. Calhoun and his whole movement to nullify this unconstitutional law called this tariff, the abomination of tariff, the tariff abominations. And basically it was a law that was really going to hurt Southern farmers in the South. And they looked at the Constitution and they said, you know what, this is an unconstitutional law, we're just going to nullify it. Now it turned out, because they protested, that law went away. But still, it's true today that we have politicians that pass unconstitutional laws. So walk us through what exactly, because the bottom line is we're trying to nullify Obamacare. Now we tried that, and of course it morphed into interposition and it morphed into some other bills, and we're still trying to stop Obamacare. But walk us through this whole process.
Well, sure. Let's just say that nullification, the term, is a very nebulous term, and it ultimately could look like anything from a 4-year-old saying, "Mom, I'm not eating your broccoli," to a state refusing federal funds. Or James Madison said one of the best ways to resist the unconstitutional overreaches is just through non-compliance. But it was Jefferson and Madison both that espoused the rightful remedy whenever the federal government's doing things they're not delegated to do. I mean, we just have to very clearly look at whether or not the federal government can do whatever they want, or do we live in a government, in a society where we've enumerated specific powers for them, and if they exceed that power, is there a solution? I know a lot of people think that the Supreme Court, the judiciary branch, basically has the final say as to what constitutional questions are, what is constitutional, what's not. But it was Thomas Jefferson that said, if we were to consider justices of the Supreme Court to be the ultimate arbiters or decision makers of constitutional questions, that would be a very dangerous doctrine. Well, basically, that would place us under the despotism of an oligarchy.
Right.
He said that they have with others the same passion for party, for power, and for the influences of their courts. They're just like us. They're men. They're not these infinite beings that have this ability to arbitrate, unbiasedly. And so, ultimately, is there a safeguard that our founding fathers presented to the states as an option whenever the Supreme Court doesn't do what they're supposed to do, and they don't make good decisions for the states?
Right.
And so. It was Thomas Jefferson that said in the Kentucky resolutions, this was in response to the Alien Sedition Acts of 1798. Four of the acts were passed into law by John Adams. 3 of the acts weren't very controversial, but one of them, the Sedition Acts, made it a criminal offense for anyone to even criticize a government official. You couldn't criticize a congressman, you couldn't criticize the president, but they did say you could criticize the vice president, who was Thomas Jefferson, and an opponent of the Sedition Acts. And so he was outraged at this early on display of tyranny. They arrested over 25 newspaper editors, Benjamin Franklin's grandson. We talk about an out-of-control federal government, And
yeah, we see in history also with the Fugitive Slave Act, you saw states just basically nullify federal law because it was just an immoral law.
That's right. Well, Jefferson said that in the Kentucky resolutions, that the states are the ultimate barriers of the liberties of the people. And anytime the federal government's assuming powers, taking powers that they were not delegated in the Constitution, a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy. And so Jefferson introduced the idea of nullification, state nullification, and it was James Madison that, as well as stood with Jefferson in the Virginia resolutions, and his statement was a little bit more fierce. He introduced the doctrine of interposition, to where he said that in case there's a deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of other powers by the federal government, they're doing things in a dangerous, deliberate way that they were not delegated to do. The states not only have the right, but he said that they are duty-bound to interpose for the arresting of the progress of evil. It's not just a good idea, it's a responsibility, because if you don't check the overreaches of the federal government, it's a slippery slope. Over time, you get something like Obamacare.
That's right.
And so,
and I thought it was awesome because, what John C. Calhoun did back in the 1800s, his spirit still lives on in a way, because you had, your group and my group and all the activists in South Carolina say, you know what, Obamacare, no matter what the Supreme Court, it's unconstitutional. You cannot force people to buy a product and call it a tax. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And it was almost passed, but we're still fighting. But I just think that it's awesome that, even today in 2014, you still have people that believe in the Constitution. You still have people that goes back to these founding documents to say, no federal government, you cannot encroach on our rights. And I think that's really, really awesome. Where are we at right now with the bill that should be introduced again next year, right?
That's right, right. Well, ultimately, when we started this fight to to basically resist the implementation of Obamacare, we were told, by the representatives, we're not going to join the Nut Caucus. You can't nullify federal law, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's just historically just absolutely inaccurate. There's a great book written by Tom Woods. It's called Nullification. I suggest everyone go and buy that book. It's a fantastic expose of the history, multiple times the states resisting unconstitutional federal laws. But what we ended up doing is we manifested this massive educational campaign in the grassroots, and ultimately what was very great about it was unity. We had a lot of different groups that maybe don't agree on 100% of all the issues, but we said, man, we don't like Obamacare. And so we had to get people educated about the rightful remedy that Jefferson espoused. And when you realize it's not just, it sounds like something fun or good idea as a last resort, but we actually have historical precedent in doing these things, you can see hope really for the first time, not only just against Obamacare, but the light bulb started to go on. It's like, man, there's a lot of garbage that I'm sick and tired of eating from the federal government. And so we had this major educational campaign, a lot of support in the grassroots. We got it past the House of Representatives. We were working on a Senate amendment for it in the Senate, and right when it came up for a vote, we could taste the blood. And ultimately, there was a parliamentary trick that tabled our bill, so it was a technicality that killed it. But it's important to understand, it was not a rejection or repudiation of the idea of the Tom Davis amendment, the ideas of nullification or pushing back against the federal government. In fact, we went from the representatives and senators saying, oh, we can't do this, to all of them endorsing Senator Tom Davis's amendment to the bill that passed the House and saying, too bad we couldn't vote for this, but we got to follow Senate rules and so on. And, ultimately, I'm sure it's like this in a lot of different state houses, that they have these convoluted rules in order to provide the needed cover for unprincipled politicians to not actually have to vote for something. And so that's what they were doing, saying, oh, we wanted to vote for it, but sorry we couldn't. Well, that's okay. We're just going to give you another chance. And so next year, we have all the evidence of the fact these guys said that they wanted it before. And so we're going to thank them for being the leaders and protecting us against this abomination of Obamacare, and get it done next year.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And Obamacare is not getting more popular too, by the way. Right. I think more and more people just hate this law. They think it's a terrible law. It's raising everybody's premium. People are losing their insurance. I definitely believe, with your leadership, we can definitely see this bill get passed next session.
The wind will be to our back for sure, concerning the continued manifestation of how evil Obamacare is. I mean, I'm reading articles all day about almost 500,000 people are about to lose their policies because of Obamacare, because of some technicality. This is not good for America. Not just whether it's good or bad, regardless, it's unconstitutional. And so it's important to understand that if we don't stop it, then where will it stop? It'll be continued degeneration of constitutional limited government. But I am very hopeful to get this thing done. We're going to be starting to meet, have some private meetings to get get strategy going on the next coming months, and we'll get this introduced and get it passed. And let's remember, it was Judge Andrew Napolitano that had a segment on Fox News that said South Carolina is about to lead the nation.
That's right.
In nullifying Obamacare. And he was asked by the co-host, can South Carolina do this unilaterally? Say no? And he said, yes, they can. And he said, ultimately, if South Carolina does this, and he thinks a number of other conservative states will follow suit, it'll be an effective gutting of Obamacare. So get ready for history to be made.
Yeah, the bottom line is this will never pass. I mean, it was a miracle that we got it out of the subcommittee, but it's because the people of South Carolina went down to the State House and demanded their representatives to be true to the Constitution.